Welcome to the Feeling Loudly podcast, a show about the power and magic of emotion, explored through the lens of astrology, divination, and art. I'm your host, Jana. I'm an astrologer, a tarot reader, Akashic Records reader, poet, and witch, and I'm here to help you feel your feels. Hey y'all, welcome to Tarot Tuesday, where we explore a single tarot card and use oracle and song messages to help round out the meaning and the feeling of that archetype. Before I dive into today's card, I just want to remind everyone that I just rolled out a new Patreon tier. It's $4 a month. It's called the podcast tier, and it's for people who want access to the Patreon exclusive audio recordings that I post every week. Those feature downloads from the planets and archetypes and oracular exploration and answers to patron questions and other stuff. And as I mentioned on last week's episode, I've also just moved our new and full moon episodes over to Patreon only. So the episodes you may have heard here where I explore the chart of the new or full moon and then do a 3-card tarot spread or tarot reading for the lunar cycle, those are now on Patreon. So you won't be seeing them over here on the podcast. And everyone at the $4 tier can access all of those. And then they also gain access to my private Discord channels where we chit chat about other stuff. So if you're interested, you can sign up. The link's in the description box below. And I'll also be restructuring some of my services and offerings in the next month. So if you've been eyeing a particular reading and are interested in booking soon, I'd recommend doing that soon, as they're probably going to vastly change over the next couple weeks to a month. Similarly, my Patreon tiers are going to be changing and actually increasing in price on June 6th. And a couple of the tiers, specifically the moon tier at $11 and the rising tier at $22, will both be increasing in price and also getting an extra perk at the higher price. But if you're interested in locking in the current rates and the current perks, you can sign up before the 6th, and that price will be in effect for the next year. So it's a pretty good deal if you want to take advantage of that. Okay, let's get into our card of the week. So this week's card is the Chariot. And the Chariot is a major arcana. It's the 7th card of the major arcana. And in the Lillifer deck, we see two, I don't know if they're wolves or dogs. They kind of look like wolves to me. But they're two wolvy, doggy-like figures, and there's a much smaller orange, sort of mystical-looking figure that's behind them that has like one hand on each of their haunches. And it's similar to the standard or like traditional chariot imagery where we see like the charioteer sitting in their chariot. And this one, though, is cool because there's like a little bit more motion to this chariot than what you normally see. Often the chariot is depicted as stationary, like it hasn't moved forward yet. And that's sort of hinting at the fact that we're preparing for a journey, but we haven't yet set off on one. Whereas this card to me actually feels like this team might be more in motion already. It's hard to say, but I kind of get that sense. Like it feels like there's a little bit more movement and progress and momentum that's happening. And that's interesting because when I saw the Chariot for the first time, not ever, but when I sat down with it tonight and pulled it, I was like, okay, I wonder, do I want to focus on how the Chariot is about like progress and movement or how it's about preparation? And then the imagery of this card is actually evoking that same question for me, like the distinction between those two states of being where we're either preparing for a journey, kind of like getting our vehicle ready, like loading it up, getting our supplies, which can feel quite Cancerian. And I talked about that a little bit on the Cancer or on the Chariot episode that I did for the 22 Days series. So if you want to go back and hear it through that lens, you can, and I'll link that episode below. But today, it's feeling quite different. Of course, it's a different deck. I'm using the Lillifer Tarot. I was using the Portals deck, and so the imagery is really different. But also it's different because the oracle card that I pulled today is intuition. And so there's this shift that's happening for me as I relate to this archetype of the chariot and how its connection to Cancer really does bring in this intuitive element to the way that we take action. The steps we take forward determined by checking in with ourselves and asking, are we ready for this? Is this right for us? What does it feel like in my body or in my soul or wherever in my spirit when I know that this is the right action for me? And I had a little moment of like wavering and waffling and whatever that third word I was just trying to say is earlier when I was trying to make a choice about something that felt really tricky. And I found myself turning to external forms of knowing, like the tarot, to try to answer this question for myself. And I have like Jessica Lanyato's Tiny Spark app on my phone. And I was like, is it a yes or is it a no? And I was getting all these non-answers. And the reason I was getting those non-answers, I think, is because I wasn't meant to be turning to these other external sources in order to confirm something that was already known within me. And this is something that's tricky, right? Because if you're a diviner, if you're someone who uses the tarot or uses all of these other forms of divination and like question answering tools, it can both buoy us and help us strengthen our intuition, and it can deplete us, and it can cause us to rely too heavily on these other tools almost as crutches that sort of replace our trust and even damage our self-trust if we begin to rely on them a lot. And that's been an experience that's been complicated and personal for me as someone who's a tarot reader and a diviner professionally and offers this as a service to other people. I've had to explore my own relationship to turning outward to these tools, to turning outward to other readers, to other forms of wisdom and knowing. And there's no perfect answer in my mind because we all need support at various moments in our journey, right? Like readers get readings from other readers. And that's good practice actually, because we all have blind spots and we all have things that we can't see. And it's humbling to recognize that we have limitations and that we have blockages that we can't necessarily see past entirely on our own. And I think it can be dangerous when people suggest like, the notion that like you have all the knowledge you ever need inside of yourself. Like I understand where that comes from, but also I think that it can be a little bit ridiculous to suggest at times when we are like fallible humans who have blind spots and biases and fears that keep us from seeing the truth at times. And that's why people live in relative degrees of denial for like a lot of their lives, or ignorance, or like can't see parts of themselves or parts of their life experience that might be glaringly obvious to other people. And that doesn't mean that they're like not intelligent or not self-aware or not whatever. It just means that they're a human who's living inside their body, seeing things from their perspective, and that inherently comes with some limitations. And so I think it's interesting to explore this and kind of realize that like there really isn't a perfect answer. It's not black and white. There isn't like a clear amount of divining or a clear amount of consulting other people that is right for every single person. It varies person to person, and we're all on our own journey of exploration when it comes to that. And so I say all this kind of in response mostly to the intuition oracle card that's come out, but I think it's also really relevant again to the Chariot, because this is a card where we're standing at often this precipice of action. And some people, lots of people, will consider the Chariot more of the action card, like you're taking action and you're moving forward, and that can be true too. But when I feel into it, it's often like that moment, that breath, that pause before you lurch forward. And so I'm curious if you're a tarot reader, if you're someone who works with the tarot, how you relate to the Chariot, and would love to know which meaning resonates more with you and if it changes depending on the context and the feeling and everything. But for me, it does. It changes, it shifts, although I mostly feel it as that pause and that sort of breath of preparation and focus where we sort of set our sights on what we're going to do and where we're going to go. And this, like, again, bringing it back to this little experience that I had earlier, like, I was really waffling because the issue was really charged. I really wanted to send someone or like leave a note for someone, and it would have been kind of like a difficult message to send, and kind of a charged one that could like really have some consequences. And I ultimately decided not to because I wasn't prepared to face those consequences if I had to face them. And it was kind of a rational decision on my part. It was like less intuitive. But then later, when I came back to my intuition, I was able to be like, okay, I did the non thing, and that felt better in this moment. Like to not take action felt better and safer. And I don't know that that is the quote right choice for me. I just know that in that moment it was more easeful. It felt less dangerous to not do the thing. And similarly, I a couple times recently have had kind of these like tricky moments on the internet where I've considered posting something, or I have posted something and then I've like deleted it because I got really stressed over the reception that it was receiving and over feeling like it was being misunderstood or causing like an uproar and being taken out of context. And that's a really common stressor for me. Like living on the internet, you've probably experienced that if you're someone who's existed on like, you know, message boards of any kind, which is such an outdated term, but like, you know, apps, text-based apps like Threads and Twitter and even Instagram, where we chat with each other and we're liable to have miscommunications and conflicts and things that go wrong. It can be really uniquely stressful to have those interactions with people because we often don't get the same level of repair and care that we would get in an offline relationship with people we like know. And so I'm comparing these two experiences because they had similar emotional effects on me, and that in both cases I felt really anxious, and I ultimately decided to like delete the post or like take back the letter because I wasn't ready to face what might come of doing that. And again, I don't know if that was the right choice. Maybe I just need to increase my threshold for these difficult emotions, and maybe it would have been the right choice to take the risk and to do the thing. And I still have room to find out if I want to, but for now I'm sort of pausing and I'm considering and I'm asking, like, do I want to take this path, or do I want to go down a completely different road? Or just like hang out here and have a meal and chill and like not go down any path for now. So for me, the way that I work through those experiences is often in this sort of chariot way where I'm looking around and examining, like, what do things look like down that direction and down that direction? Do I have what I need? Do I feel like emotionally stable enough to deal with the consequences of that choice if I make that choice? Do I have like the material resources to face whatever might come if I go down this road? And so that sort of assessment and check-in is very internal for me. And that's drawing me into how the Chariot and Cancer are deeply connected. Like, are you emotionally resourced? Are you emotionally in a position, emotion being a very Cancerian term, are you emotionally resourced enough to face what you need to face if you go down that path? And, you know, this is a question that I think when I was younger, I used to really disregard. I used to make a lot of really kind of snap choices, especially in relationships, that got me into like really tricky waters and were pretty self-destructive. But because I didn't have the notion of the pause for consideration, and I didn't really have the foresight to expect what might come if I were to take this path, I often just kind of like put my blinders on and walked down the path and then faced a lot of pain. And that pain was teachable, and I learned a lot from it, and I grew from it, and I learned to kind of see warning signs and red flags and all of that. But it also was painful. And I wasn't emotionally resourced often to handle that pain. I wasn't really in a position where I felt like I was stable enough and solid enough to deal with what I might deal with. And so there is a really caring energy that can come with the chariot when we're thinking about it as preparation, when we're thinking about it as conscious choice and conscious forward movement, as opposed to just kind of like picking up the reins and like saying, yeah, let's go. Like, wherever you take me, let's go. So there's this sort of like working with the ego that can come up too. And the chariot can be a card that at times is sort of connected to the ego. And interestingly, in evolutionary astrology, the moon and Cancer are actually deeply connected to the ego too. And that's not common in many other forms of astrology, but it is an association with EA specifically. That the moon in Cancer is sort of like us, as Amanda Moreno taught me, is sort of like the way that we begin to orient to like the family structure that we're a part of, and sort of locating ourselves as a person, an individual person in this structure, and how there's this development of the ego that happens as we start to identify our own emotional needs and focus on our emotional needs. And so that sort of Cancerian lunar experience can, in a way, be also connected to the ego's development. And so I think like there's a whole kind of mishmash of stuff that's swimming around here. But what I guess I'm trying to get to slowly is that when we're experiencing a chariot moment, we're on the precipice, and we can check in with the intuition, and we can ask ourselves, like, do I have what I need? Do I feel ready to make this choice? Do I feel ready to face what I might face if I take this path? And then there's also the sort of like egoic voice that might come in at times that pushes us forward, or on the other hand, might restrain us when we are ready. And so how do we determine what's what? Like, how do we get clear on the voice of truth within us, or the voice that might lead us astray? That's a really big question. I don't plan to answer it on this podcast episode. That, people write books about that topic and lead courses and all of this shit. But I guess like if I were to distill my experience of that, it's often that like it's very physical for me. I can usually tell based on the emotional state that I'm in going into asking the question who I'm going to hear from. And so when I'm consciously asking myself, like, what is the truest answer for me right now? If I'm all worked up and like activated, and I feel physically uncomfortable, and I feel anxious, and I feel kind of like all over the place, I'm probably not going to hear from my intuition in that moment. Like the answer I'm going to get is probably not going to be clear and grounded, because I'm sort of entering from this activated state. And so usually what I have to do is, in a very chariot way, I have to prepare myself. I have to sit down, just like I did before recording this episode. I have to sit down and put my feet on the floor and take a few deep breaths and like ground into my body and connect with that feeling of sitting and getting present. And then I can ask a question, and I can more accurately pick up on that intuitive answer, because I have the spaciousness in my body, and I have the calm to detect inflections and to detect changes, and to actually like get a read on what comes through when I feel into different options. And it's a very similar process for me when I'm divining, when I'm pulling cards for myself, especially. It's much easier to do this and to have the like healthy level of detachment when reading for other people. much more natural and easeful. But when reading for myself, sometimes I have to actually, in addition to doing that grounding stuff, I have to actually pretend that there's another person sitting on the other side of the table that I'm reading for. I did this earlier today. I was pulling cards and I actually was speaking out loud as if I was talking to a client, and I actually like said my own name out loud when asking the questions, as if, in the third person I was reading for this other human. And it totally shifts my energy. And I always recommend this to people when they're struggling with reading for themselves, because it really, really helps me. It super helps me when I'm digging into material that's trickier and stickier, and when I'm kind of anxious about the answer and I'm like feeling that upwell or upsurge of tension coming up, where it's like I can feel myself gripping for a certain answer, and I have to really find a way to detach. And that sort of perspective shift really gets me into a completely different frame of mind. And then the answers that come through are much less emotive. They're not like so charged. They're not so intense, because I've created a sort of energetic boundary that's really helpful. And emotional boundaries can be a very Cancerian thing too. We think about the crab shell and how the crab being connected to Cancer, the shell is something that protects the soft insides. And Cancers can often be wonderful at holding space for people in a boundaried way. Not always, but often, especially when they sort of like mature and develop into that quality. And so I like to think of it as sort of creating that necessary shell and that division of emotion so that I can move into a question with more objectivity. And with clients, again, that's so much easier because emotional boundaries between me and another client are much, much more like just practical to uphold at this point than emotional boundaries with myself as the reader and the receiver. And so, this is such a common thing. And I think it's something that honestly most people who divine for themselves will encounter at least early in their journey, if not for their entire relationship with divination. And it's something that for most of us, I think, gets easier, but it's all fluid. Like, I'll flow through times where I'm having such an easeful time reading for myself, and then periods where I'm like, I can't do this at all. I'm getting so anxious and so worked up, and I'm not prepared to receive the answers to the questions that I want to ask. And that's, again, like, am I emotionally resourced for this? I've had a couple moments recently in relationship with other people where I've wanted the answers to questions that like I'm probably not prepared to receive. And yet, like, I really want it still. Like, my Taurus, Mercury, opposite Pluto is like, just give me the truth. I don't care how painful it is. Like, I would rather have a really harsh truth than like a really sweet lie. I would rather be like punched in the face with the truth than like gently caressed by deception. And I say that, and that's true for me, that's true. But there's also the part of me that's like, but you're not ready for that yet. Like, you need time to receive someone's full truth. You aren't always in a position to just like receive something that might bring you to your knees. And that takes discernment, and it takes self-love, honestly, to be able to like not seek out answers that we aren't prepared to receive. So, interesting. Just thinking about a lot. And I want to move over to our song, which I'm already forgetting the name of. Symmetry by SYML. Symmetry by SYML. Okay. So I'll read you the lyrics in full because it's a pretty short song, and then we'll back up and talk about them. Come now, child, the day is long. Hide not yourself from me. Angels sing the final song. Silence will turn to sleep. Take heed, my son, the darkness will come. Black holes will bend the proudest ones and change up your symmetry. Just as the night swallows the sun, I know you'll come for me. Take heed, my son, the darkness will come. Take heed, my son, the darkness will come. Rest now, child, the day is done. The dark comes for everything. Inside the heart of everyone, there lives infinity. So there's like this inevitability that's coming up in this song, the darkness will come. And there's also this sort of like note about preparation, take heed, or like to consider. Take heed, my son, the darkness will come. Black holes will bend the proudest ones and change up your symmetry. Just as the night swallows the sun, I know you'll come for me. Yeah, so it's this real inevitability. And it's got me thinking about how with the chariot, there is this sort of like inevitability of movement eventually. Like after the preparation is done, we have to actually hit the road and move. Like you can't just like stay in the car forever if you've packed up and put your stuff into it. Like you're eventually going to have to either move forward, lurch forward, or like take all your stuff out the car and go back into your house. Like you can't stay fixed in that one place. And so there's this inevitability of the movement, just as the sun sets and just as the darkness will come. There's this sense that like we have to take action eventually, or something is going to happen eventually. Things can't remain as they are right now. We can't just stay fixed in place. We can't just stay in inaction forever. And so, I'm kind of annoyed to make this like, to have this recognition, because I'm realizing that like, as I kind of suspected and intuitively knew, that the state of inaction that I've sort of drawn myself into in both of these scenarios that I mentioned earlier, with like posting online and sending messages, like in both situations, movement is necessary. But I think the choice that I've made is temporary inaction, because I'm not comfortable with either path. But like the decision has to be made and the action must be taken. And the night, the sun will set and another day will go by. And I have this time to contemplate and to think, but eventually I've got to do the thing. Eventually I've got to either decide I'm going to like leave the letter or not, or send the message or not, or whatever. And staying in that state of contemplation can be really attractive at times, because it gives us a sense of possibility and we haven't limited our options. But once we take that step forward and we start like moving and grooving down the path, there's momentum that might be gained, and at times we might not be able to look back. And I'm thinking now about how like the idea of like burning bridges, and how when you burn a bridge, you can't walk back over that bridge. Like that shit is done. And this is a way that I think a lot of us force ourselves into specific paths, is by burning bridges so that we can't go back down the same path. Like I, in my youth, had a tendency of blowing up relationships when I knew deep down that I shouldn't be there. And I was afraid that I might go back. And so by blowing up, I mean that I would have like a big argument, or I would say something that I knew I couldn't take back that would like singe or burn and cause a rift in the relationship that we wouldn't probably be able to repair or recover from. And I did this mostly with like boyfriends. It was like we would have like an angry text exchange and that would be it. And we would block each other, and it would be this like whole dramatic thing that would happen. And I, at times, like in more recent times, have felt that inclination too. And it's kind of a hard one to avoid, because then like, it's a hard one to do and it's a hard one to avoid. If you make the choice and you burn the bridge and you blow things up and you say no more, then like you're going down that path, and you can try to come back and you can try to repair things, but like it's very unlikely to work if you've really done some damage. And on the other hand, if you kind of twiddle your thumbs, or if you stick around, or you try to take this middle path, more like temperance-esque middle path, then you might end up like regressing into something that you don't truly want. And so I know why this younger version of myself did that and why that was my MO. And I get that. And I have compassion, and I've had other people do it to me too. But I think like there's also this sort of self-determination that I'm still working to develop within myself, where I can commit to a choice that I've made and just say like, consequences will happen, life will happen, but I need to commit myself to this path because I've decided it's the right one. And that can be a moment of intuitive trust when we say like, even if shit hits the fan, even if something goes wrong, even if like it ends up being horrible, I know that I will care for myself through that. And I trust that my intuition will show me the next step, will show me the next direction to take or the next path to take. And so, we're kind of coming back around here. This is what it's feeling like, right? Like the Chariot, we make the choice, we step forward and we commit ourselves, and we decide that we're going to put our force and our motion and our energy into this path, and we're going to give it our all. And after the Chariot comes strength, and that's like the sustaining of that momentum. That's us recommitting to ourselves and to the path that we've chosen. It's us having faith, overcoming the challenges that we may encounter on that path. And the Chariot, again, is like the moment of commitment, the moment of saying yes, and the moment of setting our sights on what's next. Ooh, okay. Very interesting exploration today. I am going to keep it there, I think. I think that feels good, and I'm going to commit to my own choice to say it's good. If you enjoy this pod, as always, please leave me a review. You're always welcome to DM me or leave me feedback in Discord if you're a part of my Discord, or via email or via Instagram, are all good ways to reach out. If you want to hear different types of content on this podcast or more of stuff that you've heard in the past, that feedback's always welcome too. I really enjoy hearing from you guys and just like hearing how things resonate and land, and also getting your feedback on what can be done better. So that is always available, and I really appreciate your engagement. I appreciate you listening, and I appreciate you for being a human in this world. Okay? I love you, and I'll talk to you soon.